All right, what's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and we are back. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Okay. Now, for this Crawford Canelo fight coming up, like I said in the last video, I'm going to change the format here and I'm going to give you a different topic, a different breakdown for each specific part of this fight in separate videos instead of doing 1 hour long breakdown of the fight and try to memorize everything in my head because there's so much that I want to discuss. And in this video here, we're going to talk specifically on the resumes of these two. Right now, I can this whole video can be an hour long because I can go back in the past and dig from so many different areas of what these guys have done, because both of these guys have been in the game for a really long time. Crawford has been a professional fighter since 2007, and Canelo has been, or 2008, I'm sorry, and I think Canelo's been in the game for 20 years now, 2005, right? He's been in here since he was 15 years old. So we can really go deep into this, but we're not going to do that here. What I am going to do is we're going to change up things here because I've heard so many talking points, especially because even my own talking points, I think a lot of people regurgitate the same thing when it comes to resume, even when we've heard interviews with Crawford and Canelo together, and Canelo's asking, who did you fight? You know, these are the things that people bring up all the time, because resumes and experience is very important. At the end of the day, if you've been in there tougher, then you've been in there tougher. And what we always hear, especially even myself, I've said things like Crawford has been, Canelo has fought bigger guys for a longer period of time, you know, and I think the quality of some of those fighters are a little better than what Crawford can bring to the table, you know what I mean, or at least can show. And I think it's true. I think everybody would agree to that. Okay. There's a lot of parts that it comes with at the time. Like, what time did you fight them? Did you fight them in their prime? Did you fight them when they're older? Did you fight them when they were coming off injuries and stuff? So these are a lot of things that people are going to always bring up when it comes to comparing any two fighters. Okay. And when it came to Canelo, like, he's fought a lot of guys. Yeah, we can go all the way through this. Do I think Canelo won every fight that he actually has a W over or has a draw? I don't think so. I think there's a couple fights in there that were very, very questionable. You know, I think there was times where he fought guys that weren't really completely in their prime. But at the end of the day, no one's perfect. You can make an argument from any great fighter from any period, you know, any generation. There are times where they fought fighters that just weren't in their prime, and that's not their fault. You know, you got to fight who's the best at the division that you're fighting at the time that you're facing them. You know, it is what it is. And you can say that with Canelo. You can say that with Crawford. But what we're going to do here is being at this fight, and this is an argument that I haven't heard anyone made. I'm sure there's someone that's pointed this out. But when it comes to this back and forth with Canelo and Crawford, I haven't heard anyone bring up the more recent fights. Everyone is bringing up what they did in the entirety of their whole careers, you know, because Canelo has, you know, all these names. He got Mosley, he got Mayweather, he got Cotto, you know what I mean, Triple G twice, you know, Bivol, Sergey Kovalev. I mean, these are big names. Like, they stand out. These are pay-per-view stars. These are Hall of Famers. I mean, a lot of these guys are big. And Canelo's been in there with almost all of them. I'm surprised he never fought Manny Pacquiao. Like, outside of all of those people, Manny Pacquiao was probably the only person he ain't fight down at 154 that had a big name and a big legacy. So when you look at Crawford, you see guys like, you know, Errol Spence Jr., you see Sean Porter, you see Amir Khan, you know what I mean, who Canelo also fought, right? But when you look down further past that, you know, outside of like Gamboa, you know, there's not too many guys that was in the conversation of pound for pound type fighters, you know what I mean, at no point in their career. And even though they were top guys at 135 or 140 or even 147 at the time, they don't stand out like the way it does with Canelo Alvarez. But the point that nobody brings up is like, okay, well, let's look at this. Canelo, when we're talking about the fights post Bivol, right? Because Bivol is clearly one of the greatest fighters he's fought. there's not much there, you know, and people fail to bring that up when it comes to talking resumes because we can, you know, you got 20 years to pull from. You know, both of these guys have nearly 20 years to pull from. But when we're talking about, let's say, the last 6 fights that each one of them have, now we know that Canelo fights more. He fights twice a year, and Bud has only fought once a year, right? In the last 6 fights between them. So it's spread it out because Crawford, you know, he's fighting guys once. But when we look at the resumes and we look at who they fought recently, I don't think Canelo has fought the guys that are on a level as the people that Crawford has fought. And when I'm going to name them, now we're talking post Dmitry Bivol, right? He lost that fight. So he's just mainly been sticking around at 168 since then. So when we go to Canelo's resume, he has Triple G, who he fought at 40. Okay, Triple G was at 40. And at this period, in this stage of Golovkin's career, he was not fighting top tier guys anymore. All he was doing was trying to land a third fight with Canelo, right? So he was fighting guys like Seremeta and Steve Rose, and he fought Deverenchenko, who was probably the one really good fighter he fought. You know, Murata was good, but they're solid guys, but they weren't like, you know, like no top tiers. He was just keeping it where he was staying active, but he was trying to land the Canelo trilogy fight, right? So we know that. You can make a strong argument here from looking at Golovkin, John Ryder, Jamel Charlo, Jaime Munguia, Edgar Berlanga, and William Skull, that Golovkin, even at 40, was arguably better than the rest of those 5 guys, right? Because even though Jamel Charlo was undisputed, he jumped up from 54 to 68. And it wasn't no 50-50 fight going into the fight. The matchup itself was more like a tune-up for Canelo, even though Charlo was undisputed. Everybody went into that fight knowing how that fight was going to end. It wasn't like what we're having right now between Crawford jumping up 2 divisions and Charlo jumping up to 2 divisions. 2 totally different things. So when it comes to Skull, what exactly did he do? What did Berlanga do? What did Jaime Munguia do? You know, what did Jamel Charlo do above 54? Nothing. For him to jump 2 divisions, who really does well when they jump up 2 divisions? You know, it didn't work for Mikey Garcia. It didn't work for Kell Brook. It didn't work for some other fighters out there like Guillermo Rigo or whatever. Just didn't work for a lot of guys, right? Then we got the John Ryder. Again, these guys are solid fighters. Him, Munguia, they're good fighters. But these are not the top fighters that Canelo has fought. Canelo has declined in the opposition, in my opinion, in the last 6 fights since he lost to Bivol. I would even say that the guys that he previously fought at 168, like Saunders and Plant and Callum Smith, those guys are on a different level than these guys that he's been facing since he lost to Bivol. These guys are kind of around the ballpark of a David Avanesian or an older Kell Brook, you know, like these are on that level, you know. They're not on the level as Israel Madrimov. They're not on the level of Errol Spence Jr. They're not even on a level as a Sean Porter, you know, except Triple G at 40. At 40, they're not really on the level of even, you know, like some of these guys here are better. You know, even Eggy Velasquez he's pretty damn good. You know, it's just that these guys are welterweights or super welterweights. So they are smaller, but as far as talent, I don't think that you can have a debate between these 6 opponents on each side on who's more talented. And when you have that debate, you can go either way. And that's the point that I'm trying to bring. And looking at that, Canelo has not stopped any of these guys. So not only did he decline, but he's not stopping these guys like he was stopping the better fighters, in my opinion. Like he was stopping Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders. He didn't stop Calvin Smith, but he put a beating on this guy, his arms and everything, for the amount of blocking he had to do just to survive. He left the ring hurt, more hurt than some guys that left the ring get knocked out by Canelo. You know what I mean? So with that being said, when we talk resumes, Canelo overall has done more as far as consistency and the quality of opponents. I'm not talking about accolades. I'm not talking about two division. We know that. Two division, undisputed. Yes. Absolutely. Accolades. Crawford is top tier, generational, all-time great. But when we're talking about actual opponents, I think Canelo has the better opponents. It's hard to really beat a guy that's fought Lara, Bivol, and some of those other names we name. I think part of that with Crawford has to do with people not really wanting to fight him. And there's a long list of fighters that his promoter himself tried to make fights with that wouldn't take the fight. Manny Pacquiao was one of them, all right? Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Errol Spence, Jerron Ennis, Virgil Ortiz Jr. A lot of people don't know that there's a lot of fighters that were they were sent offers or they were the mandatories and they didn't take the fight. You know what I mean? Because at that time, it was just a little too risky. It is what it is. So with that being said, I'm not going to give Crawford credit for fights that he didn't have and fights he didn't win. But you have to take into account that these guys, he could have fought them. He wasn't ducking them, It's just that they didn't want to fight him, And it starts really primarily with Manny Pacquiao. Bob Arum didn't even want to make the fight, So you have to put that into account when we're talking resumes, okay? This guy was specifically ducked where when it comes to Canelo, everybody was looking for a payday when it came to him. The risk of losing was well worth the reward when it came to Canelo. So it would just be all about who he felt like fighting. Now, if Canelo had fought the fighter that he should have fought in David Benavidez, then I wouldn't even be making this video right now. Because if he had fought Benavidez and had beaten Benavidez, then I would have been like, Benavidez, to me, much more dangerous fight than all of these other guys that Crawford had fought, maybe outside of Errol Spence. And speaking of Errol Spence, I know people is going to be like, oh, he got into the accident. I understand that he got into the accident, okay? But we're not going to take that away because that was a 5-year buildup. That was a fight that Errol Spence publicly said, I'll fight you after, you're on the wrong side of the street, all of that stuff. That fight could have happened earlier. There was periods where guys that were PBC guys that didn't want to fight Errol Spence when Crawford was willing to fight Errol Spence, okay? Now, all of those guys over there wanted to fight him. It was because it got to a point where once Errol had picked up some titles, that's when people wanted to fight him. But at one point, Thurman, Porter, some of the other guys out there, they were looking ahead. They were looking past Spence. They wasn't looking to give the young guy the opportunity. You know what I mean? And even though Errol had his car accident, he didn't come and fight Crawford right after that car accident. He did beat Yordenis Ugas. He did beat Danny Garcia. And he looked like how he would normally look when he beat those two. I mean, he beat them two pretty bad in those fights. Danny, he didn't stop him, but he beat Danny more convincingly, in my opinion, than anybody else did in that point, up until Lara. You know what I mean? So in my opinion, I know people like to take away that win. To me, I thought it was clear when I saw Errol beat Sean Porter, and that was before the accident. But I started saying Bud would beat him at that point. I was 50-50 until that point because Errol showed me that he's roughly around the area of Sean Porter, you know, and that's not a diss. It's just that I just think that Bud is a level above all of those guys. And even though he fought Sean Porter late, again, these are fights that's out of the man's control. You know, he fought Kell Brook late. You know, I'm not going around and saying, well, Errol Spence beat a damaged Kell Brook. Well, you can make a stronger argument there because it was literally one fight after half his face was broken. But at the end of the day, that's Kell Brook's fault. Why? Because he was already, what's his name? Errol Spence was already a mandatory prior to the Triple G fight. Nobody told you to go up 2 divisions to fight one of the hardest hitters in all of boxing. That was your choice, you and your promoters, and that's what you chose to do. Then you came back down, and then Spence beat the other part of your face up. That's your fault. So again, I think Team Bud, when he was with Top Rank, when he was at 147, they took whatever fights that they can get, and it was usually guys that wasn't with the PBC stable. So overall, even though I think Saul Canelo Alvarez has a better resume as far as the quality of fighters, it has not been impressive in the last 6 fights. I think mentally, he took a hit from the Bivol fight. You know, I think he lost the fight, but I think the quality of opponents have dropped. And even though his fans will tell you, well, he can do whatever he wants. Yes, he can do whatever he wants because he's accomplished a lot, but he's still undisputed champ. And I think that comes with some responsibility. Like Usyk can do whatever he wants, but he doesn't. He actually fights the best fighters up there at heavyweight, you know, instead of fighting guys like Belanga, Munguia, Skull. These guys are not fights. Charlo, these are not fights that people want to see from Canelo. You know, maybe his fanboys do, but these are not the fights that are top tier. I think Nadrimov, Spence are more dangerous fights, challenging fights going into. These are challenging matchups going into it. Even Kyle Velasquez, I thought that was scared. I was scared for that fight for Crawford. You know, a lot of you guys weren't because he was just some other Eastern European guy. But I thought that was a dangerous fight for Crawford going into that fight. I was very nervous going into that fight. All right. So anyway, I don't want to make this too long. I'm sure you guys are going to leave a lot of comments, but there's more videos. This will probably be my longest video outside of, you know, of all of the topics because you can go really, really deep with resumes, and I didn't want to talk too long. I just wanted to make a strong argument for Crawford in this case because everybody says the same thing. You know, we already know who fought the higher level people at one point. But recently, in the last 6 fights, the last few years, the opposition has declined for Canelo, you know, and that probably has to do not only with his loss to Bivol, but his age. And he's not stopping these lower level guys. He's knocking them down. He's beating them up. He's not stopping them like the way he was doing before the Bivol fight. All right. And I think that you have to pay attention to that one fact. All right. So anyway, please subscribe again. I'm out. I'll see you guys on the next one where I'm going to be talking about weight. Peace.